at the beginning that people can put questions in the chat, and I'll monitor them and keep a note of them. And also, they can use the raise hand button as well. And between those two things, we'll sort of get there, I think.
So
you don't look at the chat, basically.
Do you? So can you be paying attention to all that, like, and just sort of?
Yeah,
totally. I'm happy to field questions as they happen, but like one of the things.
Okay, I'll do it for you, and then.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, then you can just.
Something that I'm realizing is like there's so many like threaded options for how I can pay attention, and especially since I'm going to do the phone maneuver. I'm realizing, like, I don't even know where the chat function is on Meet.
Jesse, don't worry. I'll do it for you. It's on the top, probably on my screen. It's the top right.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Judith.
Yes, Stephen.
Yeah. We can just see the top of your head, which I love. But we're going to video. There we go. We're going to go public.
Yeah, I was like, Judith is like underwater. I was like, it's kind of.
Sorry.
Like,
I'm just thinking of when we put the video together. I'm not, you know me. I'm not like that. I'm easy.
So, Jesse, I'm just going to briefly introduce you, and I'm going to say what it said on the blurb, unless you want me to say something else.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's fine. I think like there are a couple things that I'll probably just like get a heads up, but it's all stuff that's over here, and I don't think I assume like not many people are going to be able to come be in person for what's going on. But anyway, yeah, it's fine. Fine.
The crowd in the main. Judith and I have smartly promoted this as a postgraduate guest lecture, but we've invited everyone.
Yeah.
There's a really good array of people coming from different places, and staff as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
What I might do now, just because I don't mess this up, I'm going to start recording now.
Okay.
It takes a few seconds, just because last time it took like 30 seconds, and we did.
I'm just waiting until the clock tells me.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Judith.
I'm going to go pour a cup of tea. I'll be right back. Yeah.
That euphemism. Right, we're recording now, and it's going to be edited, so. Good crowd. We had 40 people earlier, Judith, at one point. In this morning's formative, we had 40 people. Yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, it was amazing.
What's the threshold for this portal? Like, how many can it comfortably handle normally?
Oh, I don't know. Lots and lots, because we have whole college staff meetings which have like 90 people in them.
We upped our subscription, I believe, and we can handle 250.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
I think there's a button you can press to turn it into a stream, and then there's the thousands.
Gotcha.
This is
scary thought. Okay, right.
Well, the scary thought is like once you post it live. Like I did a Halloween piece for NYU, and they posted it live, and they stripped. It was like part of like a series, right? So there was like a film scholar talking about zombies. There was a lit scholar talking about vampires, and then I was talking about magic. And it was light, right? And then they posted it on their YouTube channel and took everything out of it. Or took all the context away, and it's me talking about magic, and like the comments are insane. People just lose their minds. They're just like, I always knew NYU was a den of Satan. Whatever, it's just like. And then the robots get in, like when the robots start making commentary, because they let the robots loose in the forums, and then they start trying to like chime in, and so it's like. Robot, you don't even really know what it's crazy. It's crazy.
We'll try to have only the right kind of craziness.
But only the right kind of robot.
Our kind of craziness.
Shall I
hope you see the whole of my head now, Stephen?
Yeah, okay. Just before you start, I'll do some really simple housekeeping, stuff. Welcome everybody. I'm going to hand over to Judith Noble very shortly. Just so you're aware, we're recording this session, and it will be available to the public. So If you don't want to have your visage seen, I would say turn your camera off. But I don't, Jesse and Judith, I'm sure don't mind if you keep your camera on, but just be aware this is being recorded and it will be going out in the public realm.
Okay. Right. Well, I shall start then. I shall say welcome everybody to the Postgraduate Centre at Plymouth College of Art, to this latest in our series of postgraduate special guest lectures. We're really, really pleased to have with us today Jessie Bransford, all the way from Catskill, New York State. Jessie, some of you may have encountered Jessie before in other places. If not, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him. He's exhibited at venues including the Carnegie Museum of Art, UCLA Hammer Museum, PS1 MoMA, and the CCA Watts Museum. He's an associate professor of art at NYU. He's an editorial member of the Black Mirror Network and co-organizer of the biennial Occult Humanities Conference. So there's lots of stuff to get to ask him about there. Jessie's recent work has focused on Norse folk magic traditions, and specifically the talismanic rune stave spells and the Seether tradition. I hope I pronounced Seether properly, because I'm always, as a Welsh person, I always have trouble with that one. And this work recently featured in his Book of Staves, Galdrastaff book, which is published by Fulgur, and you can see some more about that on Fulgur's website if you want to have a look. So welcome, Jessie. Can I just, a word about questions and joining in. Can I ask everyone to keep their mics turned off while Jessie is talking to avoid, bleeps and echoes and things? And I'm going to try and shepherd the questions for everyone. So if you put a question in the chat, I will make a note about it and come back to you at the end. And you can also use the raise hand function to ask a question at the end if you want to do that too. So I think that's all the sort of housekeeping announcement. So Jessie, welcome. Over to you.
Okay, one thing, Judith, if one of the questions, I'm not going to pay any attention to the any of the chat and all that stuff. But if one of the questions seems really apropos in the moment, feel free to interrupt me, because I just think, I don't know, I need my train of thought broken pretty regularly. Yeah, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions that we can get to, and I'm going to try to go relatively quickly so there is room for conversation or room for sort of the back and forth. But without further ado, I am going to show a slideshow, and I'm going to present now in a window, and I'm going to do this. Now, I'm leaving the sidebar up. Uh-oh, is it doing it? Yeah, yep. I'm leaving the sidebar up just for my own help, but it's also I don't know. It just is what it is. So my name's Jessie. Thank you, Judith, for the introduction. Thank you, PCA, for hosting. It's always a pleasure to do anything in the UK. As my introduction sort of led on, I've got I'm pretty involved in a lot of the cool things that are going on in the UK right now, especially via Judith, via Fulgur, and via the Black Mirror Network. But I'm currently in the village of Catskill, which is in the Hudson Valley corridor in upstate New York. It's about 2.5 hours north of New York City, which is where I am most of the time during the regular school year. And Catskill will come up. It's got a storied history. It's a component that I've really thought about a lot in my back and forth work and collaboration with people from the UK, because here in the US we have a very different relationship to place, and that relationship kind of changes the dynamic from a lot of the material that I've been looking at and working with in my collaborative work in the UK. So a quick prologue. I just want to give you, I've been working with a public-facing look for about 25 years now. And the work started off in the 90s. I've got like 3 or 4 chunks of sort of topic space but this is the overview, and this will just give you a sense of how I break up what I've been doing over time. So this is the early 90s where I got my beginning. I was very fortunate and worked with a gallery called Feature Inc., which was run by this visionary character named Hudson, who sadly passed away in 2013. But he really, he was very much a visionary character, introduced me to a lot of amazing artists and things, but also let me sort of wear my strangeness as much as I was comfortable doing so. So at the time, I was really obsessed with science fiction and fantasy, and it was me sort of calling back to theories of childhood, theories of youth, theories of the transition from that into adulthood. You also had the internet happening, and so a lot of my early aesthetics are about a kind of ganging up different kinds of images from different kinds of places that were becoming readily available through the now ubiquitous everything is everywhere at all times gist of the internet. Into the 2000s, the focus shifted away from like a kind of otaku / nerd obsession / whatever, and got a little more directed through sort of like a critical theory lens or a criticality lens. And through that lens, I discovered the work of Francis Yates. And I'm going to speak as though everybody knows a little bit about magic, and if that's not the case, I can do some clarifications later on. But Francis Yates was a historian of the sciences who was one of the first academics to really go back and look at the historical record of science and its development. And she basically very clearly articulates the notion that science evolved out of what we call magic. Through that, I basically started focusing on Western magical practices, in particular the work of Henry Cornelius Agrippa. There are 2 new translations that are fresh off the presses of the 3 books of occult philosophy, which I think of as one of the first encyclopedias of magic. And I did a 10-year survey of the work and the sort of planetary magic that Agrippa talks about in that book, and used it as a way to take my internet learning, my internet sort of all overness, and focus it, but also use it as a way to focus different thoughts about images from the cultural record. So I'm sorry to back up. This is the sun. This is Mercury. And these are all quite large. I'm hoping that the screen is large enough that you're seeing this through where you can see the dimensions. Most of my work is large, into that in a second. But also, hopefully, the idea of sort of magic, number magic, ritual magic was starting to sort of filter in through the iconographic deployments. Through this about 10-year period from about 2005 to about 2013, I was studying magic from a historical perspective and from, I guess, what we would call an anthropological perspective. But I was also quietly self-initiating. And those of you that are familiar with the pagan religions and sort of non-religions of the book, there is, and actually in the religions of the book, there is an initiatory process that you go through to sort of confirm your belief structure. My initiation doesn't really confirm beliefs as much as it does problematize the experience of consciousness and being. The drawing, that's the other word I didn't use and I should have, drawing has been constant, but there has also been a constant urge to work in and around architecture. And from a magical standpoint, one of the easy inroads to that thinking is through the idea of the magic circle. We'll come back to that, but this is a sculpture I completed in 2015 that is engaging with the physical space and sort of talking about sort of materiality in a way that pictures only allude to. And this is another thing that we'll come back to. Detail, that's almost redundant, but you get a sense. I guess it's got a better tilt on it. So again, I want to talk a little bit about like this notion. I've used the word consciousness. I've used the word sort of experimentation, and the work from a formal standpoint, from a material standpoint, which again we'll come back to, has different ways we can talk about it. But another way to talk about it would be through the lens of sort of consciousness study. Again, back into the 90s. One of the things that really struck me as I was starting to make this Star Trek science fiction work was there was an event that happened. It was I believe, an HBO documentary or a Netflix documentary that sort of revisited the Heaven's Gate cult. The Heaven's Gate group suicide, for lack of a better word, happened around that time. And I was really taken not just with the intensity and reality of the event, the reality bending of the event, also the deployment of iconography. So it really started to beg the question of like, yeah, science fiction is for kids, science fiction is not to be taken seriously. All of these things that the internet actually has really eroded over time. I saw it immediately in my early, Internet 1.0 sort of like investigations. I was also really drawn to, of the science fiction, I was really drawn to the science fiction of the late 60s, particularly the work of people like Philip K. Dick. That led explicitly to other artists that are working with this material. I'm going to shout out to him, even though I don't have any images. Paul Laffoley, who's considered an outsider artist, I actually think is one of the more interesting and important artists of the latter half of the 20th century. There's also a pretty clear, I think, line into sort of psychedelic studies, entheogenic studies, but also just sort of consciousness altering studies. I think we're at a moment where the research into psychedelics is gaining momentum and gaining legitimacy. But at the time, I basically was the crazy person in the room saying, what about this? What about this? Mind is a extremely complicated and, questions about what is mind are unanswerable in certain ways, no matter what the technologists want to tell you. And I've just been really interested in all of the sort of thinking that goes around it. In particular, and again, we'll come back to it, there was a seminal event in my personal life, which involved a trip to the remote corner of Peru to work with an ayahuasquero shaman. Ayahuasquero or curandera. Shaman's a loaded term, as we all know, but I probably will default into sort of traditional anthropological terms here and there, and I'll try to be mindful and correct myself. That work, that experience, that opening was not just simply a psychedelic experience. It was a cultural experience. And the person I worked with, a curandera by the name of Norma Pandero Navarro, who was also sadly passed, she was acutely aware of the tourist component of what we now know is the ayahuasca industry. But she was pretty special, and the experience there again tied into that second layer of discourse, which hopefully we'll get to a little bit. This idea of self-initiation. That's not to say it's all about drugs, quote unquote. And I'm being glib in that. I hope that everyone knows that there is a very serious component to the research that's being done in the psychedelic and entheogenic milieu. And one of the places that it's really tying together, and really was tied together, at the beginning of the psychedelics revolution, is the notion of sort of mind-body integration, and the wisdom and material culture of the Indian subcontinent have always held a sway on me. And that is another place that I sort of pursued, again, this path of self-initiation. We'll talk a little bit about yantras, hopefully, but this is just another, if we were going to speak in terms of different traditions, this is another magical tradition, one that is of antiquity and of extreme age and importance to certainly my practice, but I think important to the future of the planet in general. Okay, so we're going to do one more quick thread. Actually, I think it's all just quick threads. But another thread involves this idea of architectural space. Again, if we're tying this to the ideas of psychedelic or thought expansion, one of the things that becomes really interesting with images is the way that they can fool us, the way that images are constructed in space, and by extension, there's not a second image. If you can't tell from the image, or if it's not apparent, the cube is actually rendered in a concave 90-degree angle corner. This is a trope that I've used in a couple of different places. The pictorialism that was sort of re-explored in the West with intensity, beginning with the so-called Renaissance, is something that I've been really interested in. And there are actually some very interesting sidebars next to and adjacent to pictorial realism that have a lot of potential, I've found. So this is one space of the architectural or architectonic that the work is explored. I showed a floor piece previously. This was a very, very important work that I did in the city of Galveston, Texas in 2013, which involved an all-over sort of installation. I was allowed to occupy this entire gallery. If you are an artist who's interested in residency programs and are interested in the travel component that being an artist hopefully will allow us at some day, not too far in the distant future, I would encourage everybody to look into the Galveston Artist Residency. It's a fully funded year-long residency in Galveston, Texas, which is a very interesting place. Oops, thought I had another image of that. Anyway, my plug for GAR, Galveston Artist Residency, they do annual applications and are definitely interested in international artistic buy-in and participation. So consider that. Another floor piece that I did. No, I'm not going to tell the anecdote about this. There are some funny stories that every piece has funny stories, especially when you start thinking magically. The serendipities and the sort of like the social buy-in, the social participation that any installation entails, be it with the staff that are assisting, the staff that are trying to stay out of your way, the people that are working in tandem. There's always a lot of overlap and bleed, which is another reason why the installation component of my work has been attractive to me over time. But again, this hopefully gives you a sense of space. Now I'm going to pull the veil back for a moment and give you an insight into the so-called self-initiation part. I do, as I have already alluded, do quite a bit of magical experimentation. This is a photograph from a Saturn work that I was doing in 2013, which was when I was working with the planetary influence of Saturn. We can unpack, if there's time, we'll be able to hopefully unpack some of what that could mean. But again, the Renaissance magical tradition, as epitomized in the work of Henry Cornelius Agrippa, 3 books of occult philosophy, is a really good place to get some insight into my crazy talk. Now I'm switching gears again, and this is my one last divergence, but before we sort of come back to the studio, as it were. My most recent body of work that is readily available is in the form of a book, which we'll talk about at the end. But it began with a trip to Iceland in 2013. I'm showing an example of the work that was generated. Primarily, the serialized work that was produced came in 2 shapes. One was a long-term dreaming diary project that I did with the artist Max Razdow, R-A-Z-D-O-W, who is an amazing artist and a great friend. I'm not showing any of that work, but I'm just dropping it in there. The other work are these so-called stave drawings. This is a pretty familiar image. If you have been to Iceland, this is a very common piece of signage. It's been used in many branding campaigns. The last time I went, I flew Iceland Air, and there was a whole chapter on Icelandic magic, which centered around the helm of all. The magic of Iceland is an interesting case study for me because it is so compressed and compacted into the relatively isolated locale of Iceland. It's also extremely elemental and extremely tied to the land and tied to the environment. Again, if you have ever been to Iceland at any time of the year, the elements, the 4 elements or the 5 elements, depending on your persuasion or proclivities, are in full view. Air bleeds into water, water bleeds into fire. I mean, it's so obvious and it's so present that it's kind of inescapable. And as someone that was in the midst of a self-initiation, I went and visited a friend at the time, and she had done some research, and for me, found this place, the Icelandic Museum of Sorcery and Witchcraft, which is, I should have put a map in, but is in one of the most remote corners of Iceland. And if you go to Iceland in basically anywhere in the window of November or the window of March, you're going to be catching the tail end of winter, which is no joke. And it's remote. We were nearly trapped in a couple of different places. One instance on the side of the gravel road that we were driving on, which was not a lot of fun to contemplate. And then in the other instance in the village of Lagerhall, where we encountered the sorcerer's cottage. I'm going to kind of blast through. But I do want to underline, like, if you want to get a sense, I mean, and you're in the UK. I assume most of you are in the UK. You've got a lot of that going on there too. But the land of Iceland boils over with the magical. I want to underline too that the kind of magic that I found in Iceland was a little bit different from the ceremonial magic that I had been learning about, and we'll call it folk magic for lack of a better term. I'm using it as a term of convenience, but it is a very on the ground sort of pragmatic, and the notion of using pragmatic and magic might seem paradoxical to some of you, but maybe not to others. I was really attracted to the very one-to-one correspondence with the land and with the elements that a lot of the magic had. What you're looking at here is a spell to control the wind. And the way that it works is you drive a stake into the ground, you cut off the head of one of these staple fish, and I'm not remembering what kind of fish it is off the top of my head. I apologize. You nail this fish head to the post. You make this inscription on a particular type of wood. You place the inscripted wood into the mouth of the fish, and then you point the head in the direction that you want the prevailing wind to be coming from. The intensity of the wind, you then tilt the head up or down, almost like a sort of volume switch. And to see this in sight was kind of mind-blowing, just because it's such a, first of all, it's a demonstration of one of the main tenets of all magic, but particularly folk magic, which is the notion of correspondence, like attracts like, metaphorical transference, right? If a animal is associated with a particular god or goddess or force of nature, that translates through magical correspondence. And the fish head, the wind control device is a really good way to get your head around what kinds of techniques we're talking about here. The other thing that makes Icelandic magic attractive to me is that it is very much a magic of textbooks, or a magic of the book and of language. There are plenty of other magical traditions that are much less grounded in the written. But one of the things, if you haven't figured out already, is I like books. I like reading. I like the adventure that reading creates. And so the grimoire tradition of Iceland immediately drew my attention. There's also a very rich literary and poetic tradition that is very magical. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Poetic Edda. I was very, very fortunate in my book to be able to use this translation. when I quoted from the Poetic Edda, Carolyn Larrington is as an Oxford Don. She's a really, really great and learned academic in every dimension imaginable. And I emailed her, and she emailed me back, and was a really, really wonderful and collaborative spirit. And not only did she allow me to use her translation, but she was in the process of publishing a revised and edited side-by-side translation where the original Icelandic or Old Norse Icelandic is side-by-side with her translation. And she corrected the text. It was such a wonderful moment of generosity, which, to be honest, I've found in almost all of the contexts where my magical interest has dovetailed with somebody else's. So the drawings are created but also quoted, and that's hopefully not going to be too controversial to most of you. But the grimoires or the magic books have actual drawings that look a lot like this. And here is an example from the Galdrakavr, and my Icelandic is non-existent, so forgive the translation botching. But you can see this is a 17th century grimoire. It's about the size of a deck of cards or an index card. And there are these drawings. I basically went through the collected grimoires that exist, and sort of was attracted to some of them more than others, and sort of made them my own. So you can see, I'm going to back up again. The bottom image is the quotation, and it is the stave against melancholy, which if you have ever done a winter in the far north, melancholy rears its head pretty quickly. So a little bit of magic to keep the blues at bay is always welcome. We'll talk more about the formalities, particularly as I get deeper into the content of the book. But this gives you hopefully an image to work with or to hold on into your head. And it hopefully gives you a sense that even though I'm quoting from sources, I am making these my own and bringing a kind of language to these. I get a lot of Paul Klee references, which is, if you're going to get compared to somebody, or if I'm going to get compared to somebody, I could take Paul Klee. That works for me. But then there's also invention. This is a stave using the sort of vernacular language, if you will, that I've discovered through working with these texts. But this is not an actual quotation. It's built out of the ad hoc language, as I understand it, the ad hoc visual language, I should say. I'm going to give you some pictures of just how intense it is, and just how even if you are only interested in this material from an academic standpoint, the beauty of the space and the incursions of the Icelandic people over time into the space, and then of course your ability to just walk right up to them is sort of unparalleled. And again, you have a lot of this in the UK, which I found later, or was shown later. But yeah, this is Max on the left. I'm wearing the oil jacket on the right. Your picture left, picture right. And that behind us is a very famous troll stone in the village of Dragsnes, which is, again, up in the far north. And it wouldn't have been a trip. Max and I went as a part of our project, which again, I'm glossing over. But we went up there, and of course, the first night we got there were spectacular northern lights, which magic with a capital M. And the mantra that I'm constantly finding myself have to say over and over again is, oh, right, magic is real. And again, we can take that metaphorically or literally, depending on your level of interest in the material. Metaphor translates pretty easily into the ideas of magic that I'm working with. So hopefully I'm not alienating too many of you by sort of hammering down on this idea. There's a whole hot pool culture. If I were a different kind of artist, I probably would have done a survey of all the hot pools. but there's a magical element to that too. To be able to get into a venting steam mouth that is, heating water to just the right temperature to, warm you up on a cool late autumn day is kind of unreal. And then to have, again, the Icelandic incursions of these structures that are built around them, it's spectacular. And again, these kinds of spectacular gestures are present all over the UK as well. I'll just keep moving. Come on, keep moving. I don't know. Every time I look at these images, I get a chill, mostly because when I took this picture, I was like, are we going to be able to get out of here? Do we have enough gas in the car to get to the next place? Travel does some really amazing things. I want to do just a context piece. I mentioned the Poetic Edda. I made a series of drawings that quote from a section in the Poetic Edda known as the Havamal. This is a pretty famous part of the Edda. Parts of it show up at the very minimum in things like the Thor movies, but it's pretty choice material from a poetic standpoint, but also from a magical standpoint. And practicing heathens, which is what magical practitioners who work with specifically the Norse tradition tend to call themselves, use these quotations that I'm about to read from in a lot of their spell workings. I chose to take what would normally be thought of as verbal spells and make them into visual spells. And what I just want to do is read from the passages that I'm imagining these stave spells working from. So just for a little bit of context, this is Odin, the All-Father god, who in his quest for knowledge, that's one of his attributes, he's constantly looking for answers to questions. And is willing to go to great lengths to get them. He crucified himself on a tree, went into a multi-day sort of reverie while sort of nailed to this tree, and basically was given the revelation of the runes. The runes are the written language of the Norse tradition. It has not just the Norse, it spreads into Germany. It was essentially the alphabetic language that was used until the advent of Roman letters and numerals. I'm going to read a couple of stanzas that lead into the spell quotations, but basically Odin is kind of showing off. He's sort of boasting about his knowledge of magic. And it's an interesting set of spells for a lot of reasons, but in particular, the kind of magic that he's professing to know was normally relegated to women, and this is one of the fascinating parts for my interest in the Norse magic is the gender fluidity in particular spaces. So Odin famously is crossing pretty prescribed gender roles in order to get to some of this wisdom. But that's not to say he's also he's looking for control, he's looking for power, and that is definitely a leitmotif in these spells. So he's nailed to the tree. I know that I hung on a windswept tree 9 long nights, and he hung for 9 nights, wounded with a spear, dedicated to Odin, myself to myself, on that tree which no man knows from where its roots run. This is the great tree Yggdrasil, which is the source of the cosmogenesis of the Norse religion. And if people are not seeing any comparison to the crucifixion of Christ, this was one of the reasons why I think the Norse converted. There's a really great work of fiction called The Long Ships, and wow, I'm blanking on the author's name, but it's a Swedish author. It's a great book. So moving into the spells, so he's crucified on the tree, and he's given these spells, and he's warning everyone: do you know how to carve? Do you know how to interpret? Do you know how to color? Do you know how to question? Do you know how to ask? Do you know how to sacrifice? Do you know how to dispatch? And do you know how to slaughter? These are the sort of tactics, or these are some of the things that you have to know how to do in order to be good at spellcraft. To get to the list, and here we have the first one. I know those spells which a ruler's wife doesn't know, nor a man's son. Help, one is called, and that will help you against lawsuits and sorrows and every sort of anxiety. I know a second one, which the sons of men need, those who want to live as physicians. I know a third one, if there's a great need for me, that my furious enemies are fettered. The enemies of my foes I can blunt, neither weapons or cudgels will bite for them. I know a fourth one, if men put bonds upon my limbs, I can chant so that I can walk away, fetters spring from my feet and chains from my hands. I know a fifth, if I see, shot in malice, an arrow fly amid the army. It cannot fly so hard that I cannot hinder it if I see it with my eyes. I know a sixth one, if a man wounds me using roots of the sap-filled wood, and that a man who conjured to harm me, the evil consumes him, not me. It's a beautiful spell, which is pretty universal. If you have a burled knot that has a hole in it, where the water collects, that water is extremely powerful from a magical perspective. I know a seventh one, if I see towering flames in the hall about my companions. It can't burn so widely that I can't counteract it. I know the spells to chant. I know an eighth one, which is most useful for everyone to acquire, where hatred flares up between sons of warriors, then I can quickly bring settlement. Another thing that's nice about these is I think it gives a flavor for the sort of cultural milieu that we're talking about. We're talking about, the battle halls and all that stuff. It was real. I know a ninth one, if I am in need. If I must save my ship when afloat, the wind I can quiet upon the wave and lull all the sea to sleep. A variation on the weather control stave that I showed earlier. I know a 10th one, if I see witches playing up in the air, I can bring about that they wander astray from their shapes left at home, from their minds left at home. This is an interesting detail in the witchcraft, or in in the witchcraft, there is a lot of astral projection or body projection, which most historians think is transmitted from the literal shamanic traditions of the Sami culture. But there's a real danger in the physical body of the practitioner when they have left their body, and this is a real good way to catch somebody. If you can catch somebody, you can basically ransom their actual body, or put them in a really bad position. I know an 11th one is to have to lead long loyal friends into battle. Under the shields I chant, and they journey confidently, safely into battle, safely from the battle. Safely they come back from everywhere. I know a 12th one, if I see up in a tree a dangling corpse and a noose, I can so carve and color the runes that the man walks and talks with me. Famously, there is a category of magic called corpse magic, again, pan-cultural. The anthropologist Michael Taussig is finishing up a manuscript that is all about corpse magic, which is looking like it's going to be an amazing text. I know a 13th, if I must pour water over a young warrior, he will not fall though he goes into battle. Before swords, that man will not sink. I know a 14th, if I have to reckon up the gods before a group of man, of Aesir and elves, I know every detail. Few who are not wise know that. Larrington did not like my translation here to distinguish between gods and men, which is actually pulled from a much older 19th century translation. Just a little aside, she basically said that this was a misunderstanding of what's happening, and that the idea is that before you would go into battle, you would gather, if you were in charge and were using spellcraft, you would gather your group together, and according to the countenance of your crew, you would basically assign different charms or different spells based on the powers and persona of the different gods and elemental spirits that were present in the field of battle, present according to the weather, et cetera, which Larrington claims, and I don't disagree, was lost in my translation, or the translation that I used. I know a 15th, which the dwarf Throdrir chanted before Delling's doors. Power he sang for the Aesir, and advancement for the elves. Thoughtfulness to Hrothgar. This was another one that got lost in translation, and Larrington didn't actually explain it to me, but my understanding was, again, more sort of like channeling of the elemental and god-based powers. I know a 16th if I want to have all a clever man's heart and love play. I know a 16th if I want to have all a clever woman's heart and love play. I can turn the thought of the white-armed woman and change her mind entirely. Little seduction there. And just in case that didn't work, I know a 17th, so that any young woman will scarcely want to shun me. Of these spells, Laud Fafnir, you will long be in want, though they be good for you if you get them, useful if you learn them, handy if you have them. I know an 18th, which I shall never teach to any girl or any man's wife. It's always better when just one person knows, that follows at the end of the spells, except that one woman who embraces me in her arms, or who may be my sister. This is the last of the images that I'm reading from, and I'll read the conclusion. Now the High One's song is recited in the High One's hall. Let me recite that well. Now the High One's song is recited in the High One's hall, very useful to the sons of men, quite useless to the sons of men. Luck to him who recited, luck to him who knows. May he benefit, he who learned it. May luck to those who listened. And again, luck to all of you who listened. And I hope that gave a little bit of sense of the, the intensity or the sort of plugging in that the work has tried to do in the various ways that I've done it. I've gone on for a little bit longer, and I'm going to blast through these last few images just to sort of come back to this idea of place, which I think is an important notion. I live in the village of Catskill half the time. Certainly all of my studio is up here, and this crazy house that found me. And it's not just my home, but it's the historical home of the first American artistic tradition, which is the Hudson River Valley School. Hudson River Valley School. Thomas Cole is the patron saint. And this is a painting that he made in 1836 and 37. He was a real champion for the Catskills. And this is a picture I took in 2017, but I'll go back. You see that little bump up on the top? I believe that's Lookout Mountain. I'm not entirely sure, but that's certainly the Lookout Mountain as it looked a couple of years ago. My current work pulls between two spaces. I've talked a little bit about this idea of a picture versus architecture, but I also think the staves occupy the space of things. And this is a really important sort of place of variance in all of my thinking about art and consciousness, pictures, things, and images. And eventually the landscape has creeped back into the work. I definitely call Catskill home, as also did the amazing Hudson River Valley painter Frederick Church. I can actually see his Frederick Church was extremely successful in his early career and built a castle on top of a mountain that right before the trees bloom, I could see out my window, which we'll get to in a second. But Cole and Church are really kind of patron saints for the area, as are several other characters. But Church, interestingly, really embraced the notion of there being a difference between an American painter and a European painter. when he, as in the 18th and 19th century, when you finished your academic study, you were supposed to go on tour. Sounds great. I didn't really do that when I finished school. I kind of went straight into the workplace, but there you have it. Instead of going on European tour, which was all the rage at the time, he actually went to South America. And this painting is in the origin of the Andes, which is basically where Peru, Bolivia, and certainly Peru and Bolivia, and I want to say Argentina touch. I think my geography I just get a big F, but certainly Peru and Bolivia touch, which I've been to. It's my old friend Benjamin Rossi. Again, place has been a leitmotif in my discussion. South America has had a huge impact on me, not just because of the curandero work that I've done, but just the travel and the sense of place that it imparts, and also the presence eternal of the natural order. A conversion moment of sorts, more or less, and an embracing of what I like to call plant time or plant consciousness, which I can elaborate on if people are interested. Certainly COVID has slowed everything down and given us a window into what I call plant consciousness. Time and plants work on a different time scale than we do, and that's you can almost see it if you're planting bamboo or other fast-growing plants. Another place that has been hugely influential, and I've also referred to it, is of course the land of the Isle, the Emerald Isle, and Ethel Calhoun, who is getting a lot of traction right now, is an amazing, amazing magical artist. I definitely see her in my pantheon of people, not just because of her interest in magic, but her interest in place. Her travel logs, I've actually mimicked in Ireland, and almost by default, with many thanks to people like Judith and Dominic Shepard, I've been able to retrace a lot of Colquhoun's steps into the Neolithic or the Lithic time, which is a lot slower than plant time, but also another kind of time that I think about quite a bit. Yeah, I think the metonymy of those images hopefully makes sense to enough people. And that is my penultimate image. This is a work that I actually have in the studio, and I'm going to do something crazy and double dip in the meeting space. I am going to unshare. Let me see if that last slide is worth it. Yeah, it's not really worth it. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to put my face back on there. Whoa, I look really struck with something. And then I'm going to turn the camera on to the other Jesse Bransford that's here. And you can see it down in the bottom. I don't know if there's a way to zoom it in. I can pin it and it becomes mine. If you want to pin it, it'll make it bigger. Oh, wow, that's a really chunky. So here's my actual studio space. And here is the part that we're looking at. Here's the piece, rather. I'm going to turn sideways and it might rotate. So it's not huge. It's a work on paper. And obviously my studio space, it's the size of a one-car garage, which, is about as much as I need. And here's the window on a spring day. If I look out at just right, you can see a little bit of the hills in the background. Those are the Catskills. And being here has really changed the work. And I think this landscapey stuff is one direction that it's taken it. But that's I'm also working on putting together a mini retrospective, which I'm kind of laughing as I say it, of work for a witchcraft museum in Cleveland, Ohio, called the Raymond Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. That'll open towards the end of the month. And so I've been pulling a lot of small works out, and I'm pretty happy to see a 20-year span that actually look kind of good next to each other. There's that one in person, again, not super huge. And then the final thing before we open up the questions, because I got 10 minutes on an hour, it's not so bad. There's always a bunch of stuff going on. I've been doing a deep I've been working pretty heavily with the color system of a magical organization called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was a very sort of important magical current that originated in the UK. Lots of interesting people, not the least Alistair Crowley, but also William Butler Yeats, worked with the material, and it's a bit of a mystery. If you have a magical practice, you'll hopefully see there are four realms. Those are the four realms from Kabbalah. Obviously, these top little bits are the separate emanations from creation, and then the secondary spaces are sort of planetary and zodiac assignments that get reflected in these paths that go between separate. I have no idea where that is actually going to end up, but that's where it's headed. And as you can get a sense, I don't know. I worked in the city for 20 plus years, and I finally got the studio that I always wanted. A place that I'm not getting threatened by a hostile landlord. It's definitely a first world problem, but it's done a lot of damage to my productivity because on a beautiful day, it's a little rainy today, but on a beautiful day like today, when I should be in my studio working, it's kind of like I'd rather be out in the yard, making the plant time work better. But anyway, that's not what we're here to really talk about, although it does hopefully have some bearing on the notion of place. I am going to turn this little view off by doing that, and I'm going to unpin it, I think. Wow, I really hope I can unpin it. There we go. And then I would happily open this up to questions if there are any, and I'm very grateful for your time. I hope that there was at least some laughs and some entertainment along the way. And yeah, let's see if there are any questions.
Jesse, thank you very much. People are commenting that's a huge amount covered in a short space of time. There are some questions in the chat already, which I'm going to try and represent apart from the people who would like to be hot pool artists.